What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I try and help you guys keep on top of the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. If you're watching for the first time, my job requires that I follow the big macro developments coming out of China. That's what we discuss on here informally at the end of the week. If that is something that you're interested in, and if you want to be just as informed as my clients, maybe consider subscribing. For everyone else, it's good to see you. I'm filming this on Friday night. I don't think I can get it up until Saturday night or even Sunday morning though. There's a lot of stuff going on at the moment, work-wise, but I'm going to try and get it out Saturday night. Guys, it's a pretty big episode this week. We had an earlier China update from the middle of the week. For those who haven't seen it, just click up here and they'll take you through that one. This one is building on that, but we also have some new stories and some new reports to go through. So without further ado, we'll just jump into it. But as always, guys, it's a huge help, particularly since I'm discussing sensitive material. YouTube does not recommend these videos, but if you smash that like button, it's a huge help. It does tell the algorithm that it is legitimate content. And down in the description, I also have my Patreon details for anyone who wants to go the extra mile there as well. Okay, guys, let's jump into this week's China update. So this week is a big week. The Central Committee held the very important 5th Plenum this week in Beijing, and on Thursday it published the meeting's communique. Now, we've been following developments from the central government, from the top leadership for several months now, so we shouldn't be particularly surprised at a lot of the language that is coming out of this communique and what the party is stressing in this document for the upcoming new 5-year plan, which will be 2021 through to 2026. Self-reliance, especially in food, energy and technology, was a big focus of the meeting, and we've been discussing major speeches coming from the administration over the last few months that basically told us that this was coming. This communique lists 12 areas of focus. These are very important because they will dominate Chinese public policy for the next 5 years, so it's worth us just taking a minute now to actually go through and see what the party has identified as priorities for the next 5 years. So here we go. 1, recognize the central role of innovation for China's modernization and construction, scientific and technological self-reliance, and self-improvement as a strategic support for national development. Now, I'm quoting a lot of this directly from the document. This is the language that it's using. 2, develop a modern industrial system. This is basically its industrial manufacturing sector. Continue to develop that. 3, form a strong domestic market. So this is this idea of dual circulation. We've explored this before. We've discussed this a lot over the last few months. We've been following it since I think June, when General Secretary Xi Jinping first started using this term, dual circulation. He and others in the government have called this a new model, but actually it's not new at all. The party has been trying to do this for almost a decade now, but this dual circulation is just a new name for an old policy that they haven't been able to implement properly yet. This is basically a model where China seeks to transition to a more sustainable growth model based on domestic consumption while still opening up and trading with the world. I've argued before several times that without very painful economic and political reforms, this will be very difficult to achieve. The next one, 4, deepen reform and build a high-level socialist market economic system. Okay, so what the hell does that mean? Well, many in the party would say that this is a special type of system unique to China, but it isn't particularly special or unique at all. Essentially, what they're trying to build is an efficient mixed economy, if we use a term that we use in Western economics, mixed economy, where the party maintains a very high degree of control over the private actors within the economy, and that's what they're trying to achieve there. They want the efficiency of a capitalist economy with some of the political bonuses of having certain sectors under government control, and they still want to maintain a high degree of control over the economy. That's what they're going for there when they say socialist market economic system. That's a bit of a generalization, but it sort of hits the main points on the head. 5, agricultural and rural development, rural revitalization. 6, new type urbanization. So basically better and smarter cities, better designed cities, stuff like that. 7, promote culture and project soft power. This has been a priority for years, but they've kept this, they've remained this as a priority. They haven't had particularly big wins in the soft power area, but the government is still recognizing this as a focus and an objective for the next 5-year plan. 8, green development. 9, opening up to the outside world, whatever that means. 10, improve people's quality of life. 11, integrate development and security and build a high level of peace and safety in China. This is basically party speak for prevent social unrest. Prevent social unrest. And 12, military mobilization, building a, quote, fully modern army, end quote, by 2027. The head of Hong Kong-based think tank Tianda Institute points out that this is the first time China has included the military in its development goals, and he believes it's all about Taiwan. He said, quote, basically the target is to build PLA capability to match the US Army by 2027 so it can effectively deter interference by the US Army around the Taiwan Strait. End quote. With the economy, this document does not set a hard fixed GDP target like we've seen in the past with similar documents coming out of the central government in China. However, there are targets regarding household income and per capita GDP. For example, the party has pledged to pull China's per capita GDP to about $30,000 a year, which is somewhere around the current levels of South Korea or Spain. So there is still essentially a de facto growth target that officials across the country will be expected to meet. As Raymond Young of ANZ, Australian New Zealand Banking Corporation, said this week, quote, China did not abandon GDP targeting, it's just expressed in a more subtle way. End quote. Now, I take issue with using per capita GDP as a tool or a measurement to measure the financial health or the quality of life for households in China. And this is mainly for 3 reasons, which I'll list here. 1, GDP in China is not like GDP in other countries. In China, it's more a measure of input rather than output. 2, because Chinese households enjoy an incredibly low percentage of their production and income, 40 to 50% rather than the approximately 80% that American households enjoy. So I think a better metric to follow is per capita household disposable income. Now, to illustrate this point, because I think it's an important point here, I want to show you this diagram that looks at a couple important data points here. Here it is here. Now, we've actually discussed this in a past episode. We looked at this diagram, this graph. Some of you may remember it if you'd watched that earlier episode. Now, the Chinese data here is from the National Bureau of Statistics within China itself, and this is based on a report that was done between the Southwestern University of Finance and Economics, which is in Sichuan, China, and Financial, which is part of Jack Ma's empire, also a Chinese private company. So it's hard to argue that there's an anti-China bias here with this data. So let's have a look here. I just wanted to use this to point out the difference, especially when it comes to income and debt at the household level between per capita GDP and per capita household income, because there is quite a difference. So if you look on the left, top left there, you'll see the green and the yellow line. You have US household debt to household income, and you have US household debt to GDP. And so you can see that the household debt to GDP is a little bit lower than the household debt to household income there. So this is to be expected, because like I said, in the US, disposable household income is about 80% of overall GDP. They're getting about 80% of what they're producing. Every $100 of production from a household, they're getting about $80 there, approximately. I'm oversimplifying this a little bit here, but you should get, we can see it here reflected in the graph. We can see it was at its highest point in 2008, and then it started sort of trending downwards over the years as household debt levels were decreasing after the recession in the United States. Now, the blue and the orange, we have the same information, but for Chinese households. The blue is China household debt to GDP. The orange is China household debt to household income. Okay, so we can see that over the time that this has been measured, China household debt to GDP has been growing at a steady rate. It looks to be relatively healthy. But then we look at Chinese household debt to household income, household disposable income. This has shot up. Not only is it much higher than the blue line, but the rate in which it's increasing is much faster. we see with the American information there, it seems to be going at about the same steady rate, but there is a huge difference between the blue and the orange in these two data sets here. So if we were just looking at Chinese household debt to GDP, we would think that the household debt situation in China is relatively stable. It's not too bad. In fact, it's lower than the United States. So it doesn't appear to be anything worrying here. However, because, like I said, that the household income is such a low percentage of overall production in the economy, when we look at the household debt to household income levels, there is a vast difference, and it's shooting up way faster. And we can look at that metric and go, well, this is much more concerning. Not only in 2019 is the rate higher than the United States, but it's about the same level as the US was just before the financial recession, the financial crash, global financial crisis. Now, I'm not saying that this means that there's going to be a financial crisis in China. All I'm saying is that when we look at household income or household debt, there is quite a difference when it comes to per capita GDP and per capita disposable income. And that makes a difference when it comes to analyzing the health of Chinese households. Anyway, let's jump back into my 3 reasons. 3, China has some of the most extreme levels of income and wealth disparity in the world, with Gini rates higher than any developed country, including the United States. And if you take government-directed wealth redistributions into account, even higher than Brazil. So per capita measurements of wealth and income do not accurately reflect the financial well-being of a typical Chinese household. Unsurprisingly, no successor to Xi Jinping was announced at the 5th Plenum meeting this week, as would have been the case in the past. The Central Committee affirmed General Secretary Xi Jinping as the, quote, core navigator and helmsman, end quote, using language similar to what we saw in the Mao era. However, the character used for helmsman here is different to the one that was used for Chairman Mao during the Mao era. Li Junru, former vice president of the Party School of the Communist Party, told Chinese state media this week that China must seek to achieve its long-term goal of modernization, becoming a modern socialist country, which was originally set for 2050 by 2035, and that this next 5-year plan, quote, should be comprehensively considered as part of the 15-year plan, end quote, to reach this 2035 goal. Katsuji Nakazama, senior analyst for Nikkei Asia, points out that in 2035, General Secretary Xi Jinping will turn 82, the same age as Mao in the year of his death, and argues that, quote, the main focus, therefore, is 2035. It means that the Xi Jinping era will ultimately be evaluated over whether China can truly catch up with and overtake the United States in 15 years' time. For Xi, the 2035 target must be achieved at all costs, end quote. The YouGov-Cambridge Globalism project, a collaboration between a British-based data analytics firm and Cambridge University, published raw survey data this week looking at public attitudes towards China's role in the global pandemic in 25 countries, many non-Western and including China itself. After grossly mismanaging the initial Wuhan outbreak in December and January, Beijing made the decision to engage in a massive global PR campaign to reduce reputational and soft power damage that had been caused. Aspects of this campaign, I think it's arguable to say, particularly the so-called wolf warrior diplomacy, may well have been counterproductive to this end, particularly in developed economies. The survey, which was taken by 26,000 people in July and August, may give us an idea of how successful this PR campaign was. Now, this, of course, is just one survey. It's only one survey, so we need to keep that in mind when we look at this. Also, all this is purporting to showcase our public attitudes. What we are reviewing here are simply public attitudes based on this one survey, and that is the purpose. This is our purpose here now. What potentially is the sort of international environment of public sentiment China is facing from developed and developing countries within different continents. Let's have a look. Okay, guys, so this here is the raw data. I wanted to show you the raw data because It's very hard to put a lot of it into a graph. Some of the graphs that I have seen where news agencies have wanted to show parts of this information, I think are a little misleading because they only put several countries in the graph, but here we have the opportunity to look at all the data in its raw form. Now, I'm only going to look at a few of these questions here. I'm going to put the link to this document, which was published this week, in the description below, and you can go through and look at each question, look at the breakdown per country, and go through all the details. It's very, very interesting. But basically, up the top here, we have all the countries: France, Germany, Sweden, Denmark, Spain, Italy, Greece, Hungary, Poland, Great Britain, Australia, US, Canada, Brazil, Mexico, Turkey, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, India, China, Japan, Indonesia, Thailand, Nigeria, and South Africa. So this is not just a survey of the West. There is representation here of parts of Africa, parts of Asia, parts of the Middle East, parts of Latin America. So it's a fairly comprehensive survey, and you're seeing here there's at least 1,000 persons being surveyed in each of these countries here. Again, it's just one survey, but I still think it's useful to have a look at what exactly the global public sentiment that China is facing due to its role in the pandemic and because of or despite its own PR efforts internationally this year. We're just going to look at a few questions. The first one here is very important, I think. As far as you know, in which one, if any, of the following countries was coronavirus first detected? So the question here is about detection. Where was it first detected? This is not a question about where was the source, but where was it first detected. And you can see here, most countries are saying China. It's either majority or an overwhelming majority are saying China. The lowest is Saudi Arabia with 83% say China, but there is an exception, and that is China itself. In China, only 52% of those surveyed said that China was the place where it was first detected. And interestingly, almost a third, 31%, said that it was the United States. So about a third of those people surveyed in China said it was the United States that COVID was first located. There is no other country that has any sort of this sort of notion anywhere else. It's only China. Now, I wonder what would give Chinese people the idea that it was first detected in the United States. Now, let's go down to the next question. I want to go to question 8, I think. Yep, question 8. So, coronavirus was deliberately created and spread by the Chinese government. So this is an interesting question. What is the survey telling us about attitudes towards this question? So we can see in Europe and the West, it's net false. People in these countries, on balance, are saying no, this was not deliberately created and spread by the Chinese government. These European countries, on balance, are mostly saying no, with high levels, of course, of don't know as well. But on balance, no, it was not deliberately created and spread by the Chinese government. No, that's not the case. No. In Turkey, there's a net balance of yes, it was. Egypt, it's close. Saudi Arabia, it's close. But with most people saying they don't know. India, now this is a big one. 75% of people in India are saying the government, according to the survey, saying that the government spread it. So this, again, this is not saying this is what happened. This is a reflection, or it could be a reflection of public sentiment, and it's important to know because that public sentiment can often affect public policy. 75% of Indians believe that the Chinese did it on purpose, the Chinese government. In China, they weren't able to ask this question in order to do the survey, so they couldn't ask the Chinese audience themselves. Japan, no. Indonesia, yes, on balance, but 1 in 5 saying they don't know. In Thailand, more people saying yes. In Nigeria, half are saying yes, it was. And South Africa, slightly more saying yes, the Chinese government did this on purpose. So you can see there's quite a difference between developing countries and Western developed countries here. In these countries, people are saying, not overwhelmingly, but on balance, they're saying more, no, this is false. This is either definitely or probably false. We can't say that the Chinese government deliberately created and spread the virus. Now, I want to look at 2 more here. This is very important. I'm going to skip over the bit where people said that New Zealand did a good job with COVID, but it's just come back. Here we go. Okay. So these, I think, are very important questions as well, and to reflect on public sentiment here. So from what you know, do you think Chinese government authorities did or did not try to hide the truth about the coronavirus when it was first detected inside China? Did Chinese government authorities try to hide the truth? Did try to hide the truth and did not try to hide the truth. So these are the European and Western countries here. Yes, overwhelmingly believe, yes, there was an attempt to hide the truth. They did try to hide the truth. Very large percent, 80%, 66%. Who's the 60%? 66%. Greece, okay. 72%, 74%, 80%. You can see here, overwhelmingly, yes, the government did try and hide the truth. 75%, 57%, only 57%. This is for Egypt. 55% is for Saudi Arabia. Where are we? 81%. This is India. China. They could not ask the people they surveyed in China this question. And then yes, very, very high levels here. We can see saying the Chinese government to try and hide the truth. And also another very important question, especially, like I said, if this survey is representative of these countries' public's views regarding China's role in the pandemic, then this is going to be a very difficult international environment for China to face going forward. And this question here is, do you think the international spread of coronavirus could have been prevented, not slowed, prevented, if the Chinese government authorities had responded more quickly when the virus was first detected inside China? Now, this is interesting and important, especially since majority in almost all these countries believe that the truth was hidden by the government. So, do people think it could have been prevented? Yes, it could have been prevented. No, it could not have been prevented. And we can see here that there are a lot of people saying they don't know, but we're seeing on balance, most countries are saying yes, it could have been prevented. You've got 53% here, 53% from Hungary. High levels, yes, it could have been prevented, 59%. This is in the United States. Interestingly, the United States is one of the lower percentages of people who think that it could have been stopped if the Chinese government had done more at the beginning. So actually there's more sympathetic Americans than maybe many people here in China would give them credit for. But we can see on balance people saying yes, it could have been stopped. Basically, it could have been prevented. The government acted sooner. 84%, this is India. China, again, they could not ask the people there. 71%, 75%, 74%, 89%, and I think Nigeria, and 82% in South Africa. So there's a lot to go through here, guys. There's a lot of questions. I'm going to put the link to this below. You guys check it out if you want to see the raw data. And let's go on to the next story. This week, the US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo undertook a whirlwind tour of the Indo-Pacific with one focus in mind: China. He visited India, Sri Lanka, the Maldives, and Indonesia, and halfway through the trip, he added Vietnam to the list. Now let's briefly review his trip this week ourselves. In India, he signed a military information sharing agreement with India. During the signing, Pompeo made a speech highly critical of China, unsurprisingly. The Indian side was more diplomatic in its language during the trip, but it certainly appears that India is seeking friends to respond to what it sees as aggressive Chinese encroachment at the Sino-Indian border. Speaking to a US reporter, former Indian ambassador to the United States, Navteg Sarnar, expressed, quote, "The fact that we had them," the US, making these strong remarks on China on Indian soil does give a message to China. And frankly, given its aggression and its own muscularity, I think this message is needed. End quote. On Wednesday, Pompeo arrived in Sri Lanka and presented a speech with the president of Sri Lanka, which included, quote, "We see from bad deals, violations of sovereignty and lawlessness on land and sea that the Chinese Communist Party is a predator." End quote. Later that day, he announced that the US would be opening an embassy in the Maldives for the first time. Last month, the Maldives also signed a framework agreement for defense and security cooperation with the United States Department of defense. On Wednesday, responding to a question about Pompeo's Indo-Pacific trip, People's Republic of China Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin said the following, quote, "The Indo-Pacific strategy proposed by the United States trumpets the outdated Cold War mindset, confrontation between blocs and geopolitical rivalry. What it upholds is nothing but the dominating role of the United States and its hegemonic system. We urge certain US politicians to reject the Cold War and zero-sum game mentality and stop making erroneous moves like hyping up the so-called China threat, sowing discord between regional countries, and undercutting regional peace and stability." End quote. At a speech on Wednesday, the US Secretary of the Navy presented his view on the People's Republic of China, telling those in attendance, quote, "I think China is probably the greatest threat to our country that Americans writ large do not understand. I literally believe with all my heart and soul, and I cannot stress this anymore, what we are seeing emerging is a threat beyond any comparison ever in the history of our country." End quote. Let's get back to Pompeo. On Thursday, Pompeo arrived in Indonesia, where the US has its work cut out for it a bit more. China is Indonesia's largest trading partner and its largest source of foreign investment. Polling suggests too that public sentiment towards China and Indonesia is more positive on net balance than with other actors in the region, like populations in Vietnam and the Philippines, for example. On Thursday, speaking at an event organized by Ansor, a moderate Muslim movement with millions of members in Indonesia, Secretary Pompeo criticized China's treatment of Muslims and its record of religious freedom generally, saying, quote, "The atheist Chinese Communist Party has tried to convince the world that its brutalization of Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang is part of its counterterrorism efforts or poverty alleviation, depending on which audience they are speaking to. But we know that there is no counterterrorism justification for forcing Muslims to eat pork during Ramadan or destroying a Muslim cemetery. There is no poverty alleviation justification for forced sterilization or taking children away from their parents to be re-educated at state-run boarding schools." End quote. Now, let's leave Pompeo here in Indonesia and look at general developments in the general bilateral relationship between the US and China from this week. Early in this week, a bill to designate the situation in Xinjiang as genocide was introduced to the US Senate. Quote, "US senators yesterday introduced a bipartisan resolution to designate human rights abuses perpetrated by the People's Republic of China against the Uyghur people and other ethnic minorities in Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region as genocide. The resolution will hold China accountable under the 1948 United Nations Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide and begin the process to coordinate an international response to bring these abuses to a halt." End quote. As you guys know from the episode last week, a Canadian parliamentary committee concluded that the situation in Xinjiang does constitute genocide under relevant international law and called on the federal government of Canada to implement relevant policy responses, rather. Expect a slew of toxic articles next week from state media criticizing European colonization of North America. This is what I believe is probably going to come out of state media in response to these developments. I would also not be surprised if this bill in the Senate passes, if China responds by passing a law of its own, designating the US and maybe also Canada's treatment of Native Americans as genocide or something similar to this. Such a move would probably be met with popularity domestically. It's probably a sensible domestic mood, but I get the sense that many in the developed world at least would at best roll their eyes at such a development. On Wednesday, the United States Department of Justice unveiled an indictment of 8 people, mostly People's Republic of China citizens with permanent residence in the United States, for their involvement in what the Chinese side calls fox hunting in the United States. Quote, "This was a large-scale and wide-ranging conspiracy in which several representatives from the Chinese government traveled with the elderly father of the New Jersey-based victim in an effort to threaten him to return to China." End quote. Fox hunting or fox hunts are efforts by People's Republic of China agents overseas to convince people, mostly PRC citizens and former officials, to return to China for corruption charges. China claims that agents always work with local law enforcement in overseas countries and follow all relevant laws in overseas countries. But there have been several high-profile scandals in the past that undermine this claim. I've read at least 2 security analysts observed that the Department of Justice complaint suggests that the US government believes the PRC security community has a large network of people operating in the United States for these fox hunting operations. Another has pointed out that private investigators, American private investigators, have also been used, as is the case with this case here. The following day, Chinese state media had a series of articles denying that those arrested are related to China's fox hunting operations overseas. Now, with all this rhetoric and all this politics going on between the China-US side, it's worth reminding ourselves that we need to keep an eye on economic developments, what's going on behind the scenes in terms of economics and business connections, because this is, of course, just as relevant a factor when we look at future trends in a bilateral relationship as, say, public sentiment. Business still seems to be rather good when it comes to the bilateral relationship. For example, data this week shows that China is importing more oil from the United States than it ever has before. In fact, imports have skyrocketed. In September, China was almost importing 1 million barrels of oil a day from the United States, a year-on-year increase of over 650%, pushing America to replace Iraq and become China's 4th largest source of crude oil. Okay, let's head over to the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, shall we? On Tuesday, former leader of pro-independence group Student Localism, Tony Chung, was arrested by members of the Hong Kong Police National Security Unit, quote, under suspicion of publishing content that incites separatism in violation of national security law of Hong Kong, end quote. The arrest was made near the US Consulate General, and local media report that he was planning to seek asylum. A few hours later on the same day, it was also reported locally that 4 Hong Kong activists entered the US consulate seeking asylum and that they were turned away. The following day, new reports indicate that one of the 4 was a US citizen that was there seeking to take refuge inside the compound. Speaking on the case, a Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson said, quote, China is a country under the rule of law, and Hong Kong is a society ruled by law, and the central government supports Hong Kong law enforcement agencies to fulfill their duties. End quote. Very boilerplate there. Also this week, the Hong Kong-based South China Morning Post reported that according to close sources to the paper, the Hong Kong Police's National Security Unit is set to launch a new multi-platform hotline as early as next month, for the public to report information that would help enforce the new national security law. And finally, on Hong Kong, the Trump administration in the United States has moved to list refugees from Hong Kong as a priority group for the first time. And lastly, let's touch on Taiwan. Hot off the heels of a $1.8 billion purchase of arms, Taiwan's de facto embassy in the United States, the so-called Taipei Economic and Cultural Representative Office in the United States, made another request for arms, this time with the price tag of 2.37 billion US dollars. Quote, TechRo has requested to buy up to 100 Harpoon coastal defense systems, consisting of up to 400 Harpoon Block 2 surface launched missiles and 4 Harpoon Block 2 exercise missiles. Also included are 411 containers, 100 Harpoon coastal defense system launcher transportation units, 25 radar trucks, spare and repair parts, support and test equipment, publications and technical documentation, personal training and training equipment, US government and contractor representatives, technical assistance, engineering and logistics support services, and other related elements of logistics support. End quote. Of course, the defense spokesperson for the People's Republic of China warned, quote, China strongly urges the US side to immediately withdraw plans of arms sales to Taiwan, end quote. Much of the state media that I was reading in the mainland tried to balance a sense of outrage with a sense of confidence, I guess, in its coverage of these sales. For example, quote, The threat that these Harpoon missiles poses to the PLA is very limited, as they are high subsonic missiles designed in the 1980s, and the current self-defense and anti-missile facilities installed by the People's Liberation Army on its vessels and land-based bases can shoot them down easily. End quote. And lastly, this week Taiwan marked a new record, going 200 days without a single local COVID case. Taiwan has a population similar to that of Australia, the size of Australia, and they have only seen 7 deaths, and they have done this all without a major or substantial lockdown. Incredible, just incredible. Okay guys, that's the episode for this week. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Throw your comments below. I always enjoy reading them. I hope you have a good weekend. As always, stay safe, stay sane, and I'll see you guys next week on China Update.